My name is Thomas Parker, all right, referred to as Tommy.
My name is Dawn Wisteria Bates.
So I'm Reverend Lukata Mjumbe. I'm the pastor here in Princeton, New Jersey at Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church.
Activism is me, you know.
I was fascinated by history.
Well, I think that answer is different depending on who you ask and what they want from it.
Well, Juneteenth is actually a 150-year-old celebration of the delayed emancipation of slaves in the generally in the Southwest is where it has started.
June 19th, 1865 is the day in which, for the most part, people believe that communities of enslaved African people living on plantations in Texas were finally informed that they were legally free. And the idea is that because Texas was so remote, and plantations, just by their nature, are remote environments, right? That it took a long time before that information traveled.
Two and a half years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. You know, I mean, I know, we've all been spoiled by the technology of communication, but even then,
there wasn't a heavy population of Union soldiers out there. So Texas took its time enforcing and informing the enslaved community. And so we sort of focus on Juneteenth as the day, the event, but really it was a series of spots that gradually got this information. There are certain generals in the army that get out there and sort of say, okay, enough is enough. They go to various locations in the region and they start liberating plantations. So that's what sort of triggered this event. And thereafter, you get obviously the celebration of Africans, celebrating the fact that not only are they free, but they're being protected now by smaller Union armies, but nonetheless being protected. Now, that protection was brief, because remember, this period of, Reconstruction only lasted until 1877. And then the Union Army, or the Federal Army at that point, started to pull out. So these celebrations occurred. They were in Texas, they were specific around that time, but they quickly ended, rather abruptly, actually, because once the armies started to pull out, and they pulled out officially after 1877, but they started gradually pulling out of certain areas even as early as 1866. Then the tyranny sets in. So the celebrations around Juneteenth segue straight into Black people are free, but now they're under the tyranny of these communities that want to reduce them back into a state of servitude, right? And this is when you get the outbreak of white supremacist groups like the Klan and others, local groups that just wanted to push Black people back on the plantation, largely as free laborers, or incarcerating them under vagrancy laws, right? So that they would have to sort of get people to bail them out of jail. And once bailed, they would end up very often back on the same plantations that they were liberated from, because their former owners would come in and say, we'll bail you out for some trumped up charges. And these vagrancy laws were, people were being arrested after they were liberated for things like being accused of stealing a chicken or a pig or walking on the wrong side of the road, and they would throw Blacks into the prison, and then the former master would show up and say, well, I'll pay off your bail, but that you've got to come back to the plantation. But by 1877, federal government says, you're not a priority anymore. Overlooked that Juneteenth, just to go back a little bit, was not just a celebration. these gatherings were specifically held to sort of have discussions and organization around voting rights for Black people. So it wasn't just like a barbecue. A lot of the conversations around Juneteenth just show it as picnics and barbecues, and people are just, it's the Jubilee time. They were they were highly politicized gatherings. And this is where, you know, you learned about voting rights and you discussed who are the officials that we need to put in office, who are the Black officials that we want to put in office. But during this time, Black women, their hands are tied because Black men got the right to vote, but not Black women. So after 1877, you start to see Black women organizing what they call various types of clubs. And these might be clubs around suffrage, around social uplift, around education. And this is really where you see the blossoming of the empowerment of the Black female voice in terms of who they are as citizens of this country. And they're politicizing and continued to until they got the right to vote, along with white women, of course, in the early part of the 19th century. And now you're in the 20th century, the early 1900s. Jim Crow is in full force. Repression of the Black vote is in full force. This is where you see the second rise of the Ku Klux Klan. So it's not that the celebrations disappeared, it's just that Black people had to sort of reassess where are our priorities, what do we need to really focus in the most, right? And again, the celebrations became heavily politicized because people understood, yeah, this is great to celebrate, but our right to vote is under attack. Our very citizenship is under attack. So the focus became different. It was around the 1950s and the 1960s that you start to see a revival of it as a celebration, and it takes flight in various steps.
It's interesting. I mean, there are celebrations. There are the types of activities that surround many of our national holidays. I mean, there are cookouts, there are barbecues, there are street festivals, there are parties, there are remembrances, there are particular words of liturgical statements or litanies that are read that commemorate this historic moment. Some have oftentimes used Juneteenth as an alternative to the 4th of July. Some of us back home would call it the 4th of July. We remember what Frederick Douglass said, "What to the slave is your 4th of July, but a reminder of the fact that we are still not yet free, that our people are still in bondage." And so for people who want to celebrate freedom, but they feel like they need to celebrate it more authentically, some people look to Juneteenth. It's in the summer. You can still barbecue. You can still do all of the same things. You know, fireworks are probably already on sale. So if you want to shoot your fireworks on June the 19th, then they can do that. But it's a reminder that the type of celebration that we celebrate, when we celebrate freedom, and when we celebrate independence, and when we celebrate liberty, might be different than the way other people celebrate freedom and independence and liberty.
Community lectures, to give folks background and have them be more aware. Celebrations where you're actually going to have some activity going on, some sort of official position from local governments, to recognize. These are all things that have been placed into consideration, and I've appreciated the spirit and enthusiasm about it, because again, it's a gathering of community with a common consideration. It's not a beginning, but it's a part of a healing process and a consciousness that all of us should be aware of.
Juneteenth is going to be very different. It's going to be a celebration, but I think it's also going to be a reminder that some of us have not yet been liberated. Some of us are still on the plantation.
Right now, even though what's going on right now is under a microscope, this has been the African American experience for 400 years. And was highlighted by the events of now. The disparity in health considerations that came to light with COVID-19, the murder of George Floyd, on the heels of two other murders almost within the same 2 month period, came to light on the heels of our intellectual engagements around Juneteenth. Is like everything falling in place at the same time.
We have to make a decision that we want to be free and that we are closer to it than we realize. If we decide that we will come together and we will make use of the strength that we are in possession of. I don't know. I mean, I think that the global pandemic, as well as the uprisings that are touching our cities and the longest sustained period of protest that we've seen in the history of this country, has changed and is changing everything. I know I have a lecture going beyond the talk. The talk is something that I get asked about, and I think many African American parents get asked about. They said, so have you had the talk yet with your child? Have you had the talk with your son or with your daughter about how to survive an encounter with the police? And of course, many parents have had that talk, but I remind white people and people who may not feel that they need to have the same kind of talk that I need to have with my children, that they need to have a talk with their children. Just as I want my children to grow up and to be able to survive, I hope that they'll talk to their children about growing up and not killing black people, not growing up and not embracing a culture of violence, not growing up and thinking that the reason why someone got killed or the reason why someone was abused was because they must have done something wrong.
You're not me, I'm not you. I can never truly know beyond what you tell me what things feel like for here, but the commonality in the African experience has been pretty much the same when we try to break down systemic racism and implicit bias and things that just kind of built into the day-to-day process that we've had to adjust to or become accustomed to or live with, right? And something as simple as a celebration recognizing where we were and where we are now, like Juneteenth, couldn't be more relevant, I think.
I will be on the streets on June 10th for my ancestors, for myself, for you, for all of our rights to be free as citizens of this country. So I'll be out there. Yeah.